Hi, everyone, and welcome to Creating Cinemagraphs. My name is Chris Converse. I've got some fun stuff for you guys today. We're going to be creating some cinemagraphs using a couple of different techniques, all within Photoshop. But before we get started, I want to talk a little bit about what a cinemagraph is. This is a kind of made-up term, and it really kind of solves the problem of getting people's attention with things that move. We, as humans, are drawn to motion and animation, but the problem with video and telling stories with motion is that there is a timeline associated to it. So if you've got a 10 or 15 second video, you need to expect somebody to watch that for 10 or 15 seconds to get the entire story. A photograph, on the other hand, is immediate. We talk all the time about how you get 1,000 words a second looking at a photograph. So this idea of a cinemagraph really is just combining these two ideas. We get the cinematic motion, which stops and grabs our attention, but we get the speed of photography with how quickly we get that communication message, everything from the composition and coloring and style and everything. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be combining these two things together. And what I forgot to say was I think one of the big reasons that cinemagraphs have made such a comeback, they were really popular in the late 90s, and that was because they were a substitute for video. We didn't have devices that could stream video digitally, and so to have a photograph that had some moving parts was really alluring. Now, I think cinemagraphs have made a resurgence because we have all of these different feeds on our phones. We've got smaller screens. We flick through content really quick. We've only got 2 or 3 seconds at most to communicate something. And of course, photography does that much better than video because it's a non-linear storytelling medium. So I think this is why we've seen this come all the way back. So if you're paying attention and watching a lot of the different ads, you'll see that there's cinemagraphs all over the place. And it's also a little bit different about how they're sort of applied. Again, it is a sort of made up word. And in my opinion, I sort of define this as an experience more than a specific media type. And what I mean by that is every one of these examples here, there's a still part of the image. These all are really photographs, but some of them have some video aspects and animations in there that just make it a little more eye-catching. We're seeing this more and more with a lot of the streaming services, adding some of the video components from their TV shows into the emails. Of course, we can take videos like we see with the wine and the soft drinks and the beer, again, just to add in this cinematic effect. But again, all of these are really just sort of photography based, and that's what we're going to be actually building today. So with that, if you're going to be following along, you can download the exercise files. We're going to be doing 2 examples, and then I have a bonus example where we'll do just a little bit of stuff in After Effects, something to sort of stabilize a video that you may have shot with your phone so that you can then bring that into Photoshop and create a cinemagraph from that. So I hope this all sounds exciting. And if so, get out your project files and let's get started. Okay, to get started, if you're following along in the project files, inside the main project files, there are 3 folders, example 1, 2, and 3. In example 1, we have an advertisement that we're going to be creating, and we're going to be saving this out to an animated GIF format. There's an assets folder with an MPEG-4 video here. This is the video we're going to start with. In the first example, we're actually going to take a still frame from this. We'll actually take a couple still frames and get rid of some of the people in the background. And then we'll put this together into a cinemagraph inside of Photoshop. For example 2, what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be taking an Adobe stock image. So the example that you guys have in your project files has a watermark on it. I'm not permitted to distribute final licensed imagery. However, I'll be working with this licensed photo. So of course you can license this if you'd like. You can use your own photograph, which I would definitely encourage you to do. Or you can work with the preview image for the example to learn how to do this. And then there's also a snow animation. So this is an animation that I created in After Effects using Particular by Red Giant. So this file I'm giving to everybody who's taken the course. So you can use this for anything you'd like, commercial or non-commercial. It is a gift for you. We're going to be actually combining these 2 things together. So that's going to be the second technique for how we're going to be creating a cinemagraph. And then for the third example, we're actually going to take this video that I took while standing on a boat in a harbor. The idea for a cinemagraph, of course, is you need to be really still. So this is anything but really still. But we're going to stabilize this in After Effects and make it look as though we actually took this video with a tripod. Then we can bring it into Photoshop and do our cinematography stuff. So a lot of stuff to cover. So let's get started by opening up the Gaylord Opryland ad 600 by 900 PSD file up in Photoshop. And what we want to do here is we're going to import the video file, and I'm going to walk you through the entire process for how we can incorporate video now into a Photoshop project. So when you have this file open, over on the left-hand side, we can see our layers. Let me increase this a little bit. So I have a rule that's just a little white rule down here at the bottom. We have our logo, and then we have a rectangle with a semi-transparent black color on here. So nothing fancy or special here. So to begin, let's import the MPEG-4 file from the assets folder in example 1 into this Photoshop project. So let's come up to the file menu. Let's come down and choose place linked. Then in the exercise files, let's go and get the Gaylord Opryland Restaurant.mpeg4 in the assets folder. Click place. I'll transform this just a little bit for the moment and then press return. Now in the layers panel, you'll see that we now have a brand new smart object. If we double click the smart object and open it up, we can see that we have another file inside here with a link to that video file. So we can see that this is actually a video icon showing up here. Now this is really key because what this means is the video in the original Photoshop file is wrapped inside of a smart object. So we can go in there and make changes to it, like apply things like smart filters, but we're not actually changing the video that's inside of this source artwork for the smart object. So let's just close that. So what we're going to do is let's zoom out in the Photoshop file. I'll open this window up a little bit. Let's grab the video layer. Let's drag this all the way down to the bottom, or the smart object rather. Command or Control T to transform. I'm going to hold the Option or Alt key. I'm going to scale this up. I'm going to move this over here to the right. I want to find a good composition here so that the video fits nicely within the ad. I'm looking at the left-hand side here. I want to see a little bit of the leaves before the waterfall. So maybe about right here. Scale this around, and then I'll press return. So that's exactly where I want the video to be placed. Now, in order to see what's happening here and to work with the video, we're going to need to create a timeline in our project. Now, just because I brought in a video doesn't mean that there's a timeline associated to this Photoshop file. So let's go to the window menu. Let's come down to timeline. And then in the timeline panel, we can see a button right here in the center that says create a video timeline. The arrow over here lets you change what this button does. If I change this to create a frame-based animation, I can create a cell-based animation instead of video. But let's set this back to video. Let's click create a video timeline. And now you'll see that all of the layers in the layers panel have now been turned into tracks in our timeline panel. So let's open this up a little bit. Now in the bottom, we can change the magnification of the timeline. So if I drag this out to the right, we're actually zooming into the timeline, making it bigger, showing me individual frames. So this is frame 1, this is frame 2, frame 3. This video is 30 frames per second. So for every second of video, we have 30 of these frames. And as I drag this, you can see the video actually playing in the background. So let's zoom this out the other way. If you want to see the entire duration of everything, we can drag the magnification down so we can see the entire duration of the clip. So this clip, if we grab the playhead and drag this all the way out to the right, is 12 seconds and 28 frames. Now the frame rate you'll see in the flyout menu. So if I come over here and click on this menu, come down to set timeline frame rate, we can come in here and change this if we wanted to. Photoshop will default to the frame rate of the video that you've imported. So we'll click OK on that. Now you'll also notice that if I drag the playhead, when we get past about 5 seconds, all of the artwork in our scene goes away and we're only left with the video in the background. So once I get past here, we see the video still playing, but all the artwork has gone. So what we can do to make sure that the artwork is on the stage the whole time is come down here, get your cursor to the right-hand side of one of the tracks, click and drag, and you can extend the duration of each one of these tracks. So I'm going to click and drag each one of these so that they're all 12 seconds and 28 frames. So now as I drag this back and forth, we can see the graphics are on the stage the whole time. So now what we want to do is create a still frame of this video and mask out only parts of the video that we want to show through, which would be the water in this case. So what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate the video. Now you want to make sure to bring the playhead all the way back to 0 before you duplicate. But if you don't, if I had my playhead out here around 7 seconds, for example, come over here to the layers panel, duplicate this layer by hitting Command or Control J. What you'll see in the timeline panel is that this video now starts where the playhead is set in the timeline panel. Now, if you do this by accident, what you can do is you can click this layer and just drag it back. We want to make sure that both video layers are in sync with each other. I'm actually going to create 2 copies. So I'll bring the playhead back to 0, grab one of the copies, Command or Control J, create a second copy. We're going to name one of them still frame 1. Name the second one still frame 2. And what I want to do is combine 2 still frames to try to get rid of as many people as I can in the background here. So let me zoom up here a little bit. So now let's drag the playhead. And I'm kind of watching a couple things here. I'm watching this area here. I want this to be clear of people. So when I get to about this point right here, this is very clear. We don't have anyone in the way. I'm going to continue to drag this and see how long that area is clear. So here comes somebody walking in, and this guy's standing here as well. And so I'm going to take my first still frame from right here. So let's come over here to still frame 1. Let's select that layer. Then let's right click and choose rasterize layer. So that's going to take the frame of the video and it's going to turn it into just a regular pixel layer here inside of Photoshop. So there's our first frame. Let's hide this now. On the second still frame, let's go ahead a little bit. And now I want this area to be clear. So we've got 2 people walking around in here. So now I'm going to drag this until they're both sort of out of the way. So when I get to about right here, this area is clear. So let's come over here to still frame 2. Let's right click, rasterize layer. So now I have these 2 frames here. So now let's select frame 1. Let's apply a layer mask. Hit the letter B for the brush tool. Make sure we're using a soft brush. And we're going to paint black on the foreground, and we're going to get rid of these people right here. We'll just paint around here a little bit. I was using a tripod when I shot this video, so I don't have to worry about things moving too much. So I can paint around a little bit. And now with the combination of these 2, I've gotten rid of most of the people in the scene. There's somebody in the background here, but that's okay. They're behind the sort of ghosted, faded rectangle. So at this point, these 2 frames look great. Let's select still frame 1 and still frame 2. Hit Command or Control G. Let's put those into a group. We'll call this still frames. And now what we're going to do is select the still frames group. Let's apply a layer mask to the group. Let's zoom up here a little bit. And if we play the timeline panel, you'll notice that nothing is actually moving. That's because we have these 2 still frames which are covering the entire video. So let's bring the playhead. It doesn't really matter where we bring it. I'll just bring it over here to around 3 or 4 seconds. And then let's come over here to the layer mask. Just like before, B for the brush tool. Let's make sure we have a soft brush. And let's come in here and let's paint the area that we want to show in the background. Now, one thing that can be really tricky is we can't really tell the area that we've painted. So what I'll do is I'll come in here to the layers panel. We'll create a new layer. I'll call this FPO. I'll get a really gross bright color. Actually, the pink color is pretty good. I'll fill the entire area with that pink color. Then I'll set the opacity down, maybe to about 40%. And what this does is this shows me what I'm revealing from this mask on the background. So I can kind of tell where I'm painting. So now I can come in here and paint on that mask and know that I'm getting all of the water area here. So we'll paint around. Once I have that in place, I can come down here and drag the playhead. And now I can see that the video is playing underneath the area that we masked out. Now the FPO layer isn't going the entire duration of the video, but that's okay. We only wanted that just to show us where we painted our content. Once that's in place, I'll come back here and delete the FPO layer. Now we can come down here, we can hit play, and we can see the video playing. And so now that we have our still frame masked, now we're going to create our loop. So let's come in here. I'm going to zoom up here so we can see the video in the top part of my screen. I'll close this up a little bit so I can have a little bit more room for my timeline panel. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a seamless loop out of this video. So if I were to play the video to the very end, when I get to the end here, 12 seconds and 28 frames, if I were to click back at the 0 point, you'll see that the water is in a different position. This water is never going to seamlessly loop. It's always going to have a beginning and an ending point. And if we let it play through, I'll just let this play through here. When it jumps over, you'll see it sort of jumps. So I really like my Cinemagraphs to have as seamless a looping point as possible. If it can be completely seamless, like the snow example we're going to do next, that's my favorite. But if I can't have something seamless, something in nature like water or fog or rain, then I'm going to show you a technique here that will allow us to create a nice seamless transition so that the people watching this won't notice that particular transition. So the first thing that we're going to do is decide how long this animation should be. So we want to have this be an animated GIF, which means we can use this in an email, but I don't want it to be too long in duration. I also don't need the video to be very long because the water doesn't change very much. It is different all the time. It is fully random for as long as you would watch it. But to the end user, it sort of has the same sort of feel and style. So I'm going to set this to be about 5 seconds long. So in the timeline panel, I'm going to drag my playhead out until we're at 5 seconds and 0 frames. The time code here, the last two numbers are the frames. So there are 30 frames, if I drag this forward, until we get to 6. So at 5:29, one more frame is 6 seconds. So let's come out here to 5 seconds and 0 frames. Then let's come up here and grab this little handle here, which is the work area. This tells Photoshop what area of the timeline panel we would like to export. So when we render either a video or animated GIF, Photoshop will only export the working area. And this works exactly the same way as the work area in After Effects. So I'll drag this over to here. So now we're working with a 5-second timeline. Then we're going to come down here to the video. So for the video, let's come in here and let's clip the video's ending point to be 5 seconds as well. So click on the end here. Let's drag this back. It'll snap over to the timeline panel at 5 seconds. There we go. So now at 5 seconds, the video is going to loop back to the beginning. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take the video and we're going to split it right here in the middle because we know that this frame and the one frame before it match perfectly because it's part of the same sequence. So let's come down here, get your playhead between the beginning and ending point of the video. Then let's come up here and click on the scissors tool. We'll click one time and now we'll get a copy of the smart object. Inside the smart object is the original video. So we haven't done anything to change the original video, but we now have two smart objects and the video inside the smart object has different in and out points, which is really cool. So this bottom layer, the last frame here matches the first frame of the layer above it because we cut this right in the middle. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take the top video and we're going to move this back so that that frame that matches the bottom video is the beginning of the video. Then we're going to take the bottom video and we're going to move this out to the right. So this last frame here, the last frame here on the right matches this frame over here. So now when we get to the very end, if I let this play, it seamlessly plays from the end back to the beginning. So now we just need to blend the frames here in the middle. Now, I want you to pay attention to the layers panel because something interesting is going to happen when we drag these two clips to be on the same track. Right now, we're using Photoshop in sort of its layer photography mode or photo mode, where each one of these smart objects is in its own layer. Now, if I come over here to the timeline panel and I grab this video and I drag it up so that it's next to the video, we get a new group over here called a video group. Now, this really is just a layer group. However, being a video group, what this means is all of the video tracks will line up next to each other. So this turns Photoshop into something like a nonlinear video editor, like the way you would work with video in a tool like Premiere Pro. And what this allows us to do is to create a transition between these two clips. So let's come up here in the timeline panel. Let's click on this transition button here. And let's come over here and grab crossfade. And let's drag and drop it so that it covers up the end of the first clip and the beginning of the second clip. We'll get this little crossfade icon here. Let's click away. And now if we drag the playhead between these two, we're going to get a nice crossfade. So the opacity is being set from the bottom layer from 100% down to 0 for this entire duration. The bottom one is being set from 0 up to 100%. So when I'm right in the middle here, each of the layers is at 50%. So I can drag this through and I can kind of watch and see how that transition looks. If I want to change the speed, I can right click on this. The duration default is set to 1 second. So I might try to set this down to maybe 0.4 seconds. The faster the transition, the less likely somebody is to notice it. However, we also might introduce a sort of a jump. So if I come in here and just hit play, we can just sort of watch that. So I could sort of see that jump really quick. So maybe I'll come in here, right click, and I'll set this up to about 0.7. So I don't want a full second. You can also magnify the timeline to see this. I don't want a full second because you can start to see that, but I don't want it to be too quick because we'll still get the same jump. 0.4 of a second is 0.4 of 30. So we're only talking about, what's that, roughly 8 or 9 frames. So it's pretty quick. So I like that, about 0.7. So now when we hit play, this plays through. You're not going to notice it. And at the end, this is going to loop back to the beginning. Now, since we did a transition, what that means is the clips are overlapping now by 0.7 seconds. So the overall duration is going to be a little bit shorter. So it's not going to be quite 5 seconds anymore. So let's come over here, drag the work area back. Then we'll click play. And now we'll get this beautiful, seamlessly looping water that's going to play through our project. You'll notice this little blue highlight here across the top. When this is a full blue line, Photoshop has the artwork completely cached. So the playback is going to be pretty close to real time. Now I say pretty close because the timeline panel in Photoshop, in my experience, has never looked like the final output. The final output for GIF or MPEG-4 seems to play a slight bit faster than what you see inside of Photoshop. But this is giving us a really good representation of what this is going to look like. So that looks great. Let's come up here. I'll just zoom out on the main timeline so we can play this and take a look at our final project. Now, before we render this out, I want to make some color adjustments. So what I'm going to do is drag the playhead back to 0. Let's come over here to our layers panel. I'm going to select both of these groups. Let's right click and put these into a smart object. Now, one of the really cool things about a smart object in Photoshop that has animation in it is that the animation is preserved inside of the smart object. So all of this time we spent creating the still frames and the looping points and the masks are all contained in that smart object. So now in my main Photoshop file, I just have one layer down here at the bottom to work with. You'll also notice that the work area remained the same. So I can click play and it's going to loop at exactly the same point as before. But since this is a smart object now, I can come up here to my filter menu, come down and add a camera raw filter, and we can come in here and make some color adjustments. So now in here, you can make whatever adjustments you think look great. I'm going to come in here and increase the temperature a little bit. Of course, the other great thing is we're seeing the original source image here, so I can see the full area in order to make some of my decisions. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to bump my shadows and blacks a little bit. Pull down some of the highlights. This does get a little bright in the background here, so I might pull this down a good bit. Bump my vibrance up just a little bit and maybe a little on the saturation. Then I'll come up here and add a radial filter. Maybe over in this area. And I might just decrease our exposure just a little bit here. Just sort of a way that I can do sort of a custom vignette here. Pull this down and maybe saturate that just a little bit. Then click OK. So again, any changes you want to make in Camera Raw, of course you can do that. Again, we are in Photoshop, so in addition to working with video, we can do all of the cool Photoshop adjustments. And now at this point, we're ready to export this out. So what we're going to do is we're going to create an animated GIF of this. The file size is pretty small, 600 by 900, so it's not a lot of pixels, and we want to use this in an email. So let's come up to the File menu. Let's come down to Export, choose Save for Web Legacy. Right now, this is the only way that you can get an animated GIF from Photoshop. There is an animated GIF export option in Media Encoder. You can't access it directly from within Photoshop, but you can export an MPEG-4 and then use Media Encoder to create an animated GIF. However, you're not going to get all the controls that we're going to have here. So inside the Save for Web panel, let's come up here and change the format to GIF. If you're working with cell-based animation or video-based animation, as long as you have a timeline enabled, the animated GIF format will create an animation for you. Now this might take a few seconds as well. We are working at 30 frames per second. And then once Photoshop is done converting this to an animated GIF, we'll see all the properties show up here. So we can see the different coloring options here, the different dithering, the number of colors that are being used, and all of the things that you can do inside Save for Web. This is one of the most powerful animated GIF export options that are available out on the web. And we use this all the time for compressing animated GIFs for email. Now, if the file size is too large, if I look over here to the left, this is 9.2 megs. That's pretty large for an email. I've seen some emails. If I get an animated GIF, I pull it out and see what the file size is. So I haven't seen anything much greater than about 4 to 4.5 megabytes. That still seems kind of heavy, but it's a broadband world now. So I see a lot of animated GIFs that are about 4 megabytes. So we could do a couple of things here. We could come in here and change the size. We could change the frame rate and just do a couple of different things to get the file size down. Once we like that, we can come over here and hit done, and that the settings will be remembered. So if we go back to Save for Web, we don't have to change any of the settings. It'll just be remembered, or we can hit save and export out this final file. So at this point, I'll just cancel this out. And so we've taken a look at the first example here where we've taken a video, locked onto a still frame, created a mask, and then exported out a final project that we can use for an email campaign. In the next example, we're going to take a video and we're going to superimpose it on top of a photograph. So to continue on, let's close this file and save it. Let's go back to our project files. Let's go into the example 2 folder, and let's start by opening up the social promo 607 by 1080.psd file. So this particular file here is going to be running on Instagram. We're going to be able to use an MPEG-4 for this, so we can use a video format. So to begin, let's place in the image that we got from Adobe Stock. So again, I'm going to be using a licensed version of this file, but I included the preview in your files. So let's come down to the File menu inside of Photoshop. Let's choose Place Linked. Let's go and grab that JPEG file and click Place. Let's zoom out here a little bit and let's scale this up so it takes the full width. And then I'm going to increase this just a little bit, just so we have a little bit of space before her button here. And we'll move her to the right just a little bit. Maybe I'll scale it up using our rule of thirds. I'm looking at about right here for her left eye. So right about there. Press return. Okay, so that looks great. So now what we're going to do here is we're going to add a video that we're going to place over top of her. So let's go up to the File menu. Let's come down and choose Place Linked. And in that same Assets folder, let's go and grab that snow file. Let's hit Place. I'll just press Return. Now over here in the Layers panel, we see that we have a regular smart object. If we double click the smart object, just like before, we can see the video showing up down here. So now down here, we can play this and we can see the animation playing in the timeline panel. So let's zoom out here. We want to be able to see the entire duration. So the snow is 10 seconds long, and the snow automatically loops. So I set the particle system up so that when we get to the last frame, if we jump back to the beginning frame, you'll see that all the particles are in exactly the same spot. So that's something that I set up in the animation already. So the cool thing is, as long as your animation is 10 seconds long, you don't have to do anything to make this seamlessly loop. So for this one, we're going to keep this at 10 seconds. So let's come down here to the image of the woman. Let's drag her duration out so that she also is 10 seconds. So she's on the stage the whole time. Then let's come over here to the video layer. Let's select this. Let's come up here to the blending mode, and we'll come down here and choose screen. So that is going to quickly drop out the black background and just give us the white snow over top of the photo. So we'll zoom up here a little bit. So this looks pretty good, but this could be a lot more interesting. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a copy of her and mask her out. And we're going to put in a couple of copies of the snow animation so we can get this nice parallax effect. We'll have some snow in the background that'll be a little bit smaller and some snow in the foreground that'll be a little bit larger. So it'll just look a little bit more realistic. So to do that, let's come over here to the layers panel. Make sure the playhead is at the 0 mark. Let's come over here and Command or Control J. Let's duplicate the photo of the woman. Let's drag her copy up to be the topmost layer. Then let's come over here and let's use our object selection tool. Let's click and drag. Now this tool works really well, but it doesn't have to be too perfect because the snow is really small. So we don't have to worry about creating a perfect mask. But this mask actually looks pretty good so far. With this selection, let's come up here and choose Select and Mask. In the Select and Mask workspace, change your view to black and white. With that selected, let's come down to the radius. Let's increase this a little bit so that we can actually get a little bit more detail. So I want to see more of her hair in this area here. Now we have some black showing up in the middle here. That's okay. We're going to manually paint some of that out. So we'll move that to about that point there. We're going to click OK. And with this layer still selected, with the selection still active, let's come over here and add a layer mask. Now let's hold the Option or Alt key, click on the layer mask. That's going to show us all the black and white pixels. And then I'll come in here and just manually make a few changes. So I'm going to paint out some of these areas that I know are not part of her hair. So I'll just move around here a little bit. Paint some of these. Doesn't matter if I don't get some of the details of the hair because again, this is just going to be hiding some snowflakes. So I'll go around the outside here, paint this. Then I'm going to hit the X key, which will put white on the foreground. And I don't want any snowflakes showing in front of these areas. So I'm going to come in here and just paint white in here. Okay, so that looks great. Now we'll go back. So now if I zoom up here, play the timeline panel, you'll see that it's snowing behind her, but not in front of her. Let me zoom out here a little bit. So now let's come down to the timeline panel. Let's increase the duration of her copy. So she's on the whole time. Then let's zoom out a little bit. Let's come over here to the layers panel. Let's duplicate the snow layer, Command or Control J. Let's move that to the top, Command or Control right bracket. Now in this copy, I'm going to zoom out here just a little bit more. Let's hit Command or Control T to transform, and we're going to scale this up quite a bit. So I might zoom out and scale this up a lot. I want these snowflakes to be really big in front of her. I'm also going to rotate this a little bit. Move this over here. Press return. Now when we zoom up, we've got some snowflakes. Now you'll see down in the timeline panel, I didn't have my playhead at 0, so that moved a little bit. Let me just drag it back. So now when we drag this, we have some snowflakes that are in front of her, and we have other snowflakes in the back that are behind her. You'll also see that the speed appears to be different. The snowflakes in the front appear to be moving faster. This is because we scaled the video and it's now larger, which means that the snow is moving more pixels moving a distance of more pixels because it's being scaled up than the pixels in the background. So now we're getting this nice parallax effect as well. So that's looking really cool. So let's do a few more things over here. So let's select the snow layer that we just duplicated, the large one. Let's duplicate it again, Command and Control J. Now for the copy, I'm going to drag this underneath the first one. I'm going to clip group this in to her shape. So you can hold the Option key or Alt in Windows to create a clipping mask. You can also do that by going up to the layer menu and coming down and saying create a clipping mask. And on this layer, let's come in here and let's change the blending mode from screen to color dodge. And that's going to be a subtle change. Let me hide the first one. What color dodge is going to do is it's going to really exaggerate the colors when the colors go over top of her face. So it's going to be a real sort of stylized effect. So they almost sort of glow as they're moving across here. So these look super cool like that. I'm also going to do something else to these front layers. Let's turn on the front layer of snow again. And that matches exactly where all the color dodge is happening. And on this layer, let's come up to the filter menu. Let's come down to blur and let's come down and add a motion blur. So for the motion blur, let's come in here and set this to vertical. We're going to set this to about maybe 30 pixels. And so what this is doing is it's making those snowflakes in the front feel like they're moving faster. Maybe the shutter speed didn't get them quite as quick, so we get this blurring effect. I'm actually going to angle these a little bit this way. As I make these changes, you can see this changing on the screen there. Let's click OK. And then finally, let's come in here and set the opacity down just a little bit on here. So maybe down to about 60 or 70. So we've got the snow in its larger state or scaled state 2 different times. We've got it once with the color dodge effect and once with the motion blur. So the color dodging is matching the snowflakes in the front and the motion blur. Now, if we want the snowflakes in the background to be a little stronger, we can always duplicate those as well. Again, bring the playhead back to the 0 mark. Command and Control J, duplicate that layer. That's going to make the snowflakes twice as bright in the background. And on the second copy, we can come in here and lower the opacity. And then, of course, finally, it wouldn't be complete if we didn't do something with Camera Raw. So just like before, we're going to come in here and select all of these layers. We're going to right click. We're going to choose Convert to Smart Object. Once that comes up, we're going to come up to our filter menu. We're going to come down to Camera Raw. Zoom up here a little bit. I'm going to come in here to our radial, one of my favorite features here. Let's zoom this up. And let's come in here and let's just decrease the exposure on everything on the outside. Lower the contrast a little bit. We're going to lower the highlights as well. We want the snow to show up against some of those lighter areas a little bit more. We'll increase the blacks a little bit just to get some of the detail in the shading. Then, of course, we can do a little bit with our noise and then click OK. So now we have one layer here in our main Photoshop file, 10 seconds long with our seamlessly looping particle system. So at this point, let's export this out as an MPEG-4 file. So let's come up to the File menu. Let's come down to Export. Let's choose Render Video. And in this dialog box here, we can choose what format we'd like to save this out as. And so what we want to do is choose the MPEG-4 format, which is also the H.264 format. So under location, you can choose where this is going to be output. You can select a folder. For the export type, we're going to choose the Adobe Media Encoder. And under format, this is where you want to choose the H.264. Everything else is pretty self-explanatory. You can come up here and click render, and this will render out a final MPEG-4 file that you can use anywhere that video is supported. So not only online or social media channels, but you can put this into presentations. You can embed it into a PDF now, including embedded in through InDesign. That was a new feature that came out pretty recently for InDesign. Again, anywhere that you can use video, you can use this format. So at this point, I'm going to hit cancel. Let's close out of all of this. Make sure you save your work. And as the last little bonus piece, I wanted to show you how you can take a video, that may look like you can't use it in a Cinemagraph because it sort of moves around and wasn't on a tripod. And we're going to actually stabilize that with After Effects. So if you've never used After Effects before, that's okay. I would encourage you to just give this a shot. If you have Photoshop, you probably have Creative Cloud, which means you can download After Effects. And I basically want to just show you how we can take this video here, which is not stabilized at all. Obviously, I was not on a tripod. Everything's moving around. And we'll actually stabilize this in After Effects. So if you'd like to try this out, launch After Effects. And once After Effects comes up, what I'd recommend that you do is come up to the window menu, if you're new to After Effects, and activate the small screen workspace, which will look something like this. Then you can go back to your operating system. You can grab the harbor.mpeg4 file and just drag it right into the project panel inside of After Effects. Or you can choose the File menu and choose Import, and then Import File. In either case, you're going to get your video file in the project panel. And now we need to create a composition in After Effects. And you can do that by grabbing the MPEG-4, just drag and drop it right into the composition panel. After Effects will automatically make a composition. It will give you a layer in the timeline panel. And then you can go over to the Effects and Presets panel. You can get to that by going to the window menu, come down to Effects and Presets, which is up here. And then in here, you're going to search for something called the Warp Stabilizer. So just type in the word warp. You'll see Warp Stabilizer. Select this and just drag and drop it right on top of the video. So now After Effects is going to go through and analyze the footage. The first thing it's trying to do is it's trying to not get rid of the motion, but it's trying to make it not so jumpy. So if you ever have a video you've taken on your phone or camcorder in the old days, that's been digitized, and as you're walking around, everything's sort of moving around really quick. This tool will just make it look a lot smoother, so it's not quite as jerky. But the other thing that this can do is once it's done, is it can actually stabilize the footage to make it look as though you shot this from a tripod. So once the stabilization has gone through, I can come down here and click and drag. And again, you'll see that it moves, but it's not quite as jarring. But now if I come up here to the result in the Effect Controls panel, and if you don't see the Effect Controls, you can open that up from the window menu, come down to Effect Controls. With the video selected, let's come down here to the result and change this from smooth motion down to no motion. After Effects will analyze the footage again. And now if we come down here to the timeline panel and play this by hitting the spacebar, this footage now looks like we shot this on a tripod. That is incredible for us to be able to take footage that was wildly moving around and be able to stabilize it. And so now what we can do is we can export this out to a QuickTime movie or an MPEG-4 and then use it inside of Photoshop. So to do that, we would go up to the File menu, choose Export, choose either Add to Media Encoder Queue or Add to Render Queue. For the moment, I'll just choose Add to Render Queue. Now in the Render Queue panel, we can come down here. For the settings, choose Best Settings. You can compress it later even further inside of Photoshop. You're going to want to choose Lossless with Alpha. That's going to give you a QuickTime movie. And then you can click on this title here, which will let you choose where you're going to save it. So we'll save it to the desktop as harbor.mov. Then hit Save. Then come down here and click Render. The final video file, you can then bring it into Photoshop and do all the things we've been doing with video inside of Photoshop throughout this entire session. So I wanted to throw this little example in here in case you had a video you shot on a phone, you wanted to turn it into a Cinemagraph, but you didn't think you had a way to do it. This is a really quick way inside of After Effects to save that footage and be able to use it in a Cinemagraph. And so with that, I'll be concluding this session on creating Cinemagraphs. I hope you enjoyed working with video and animation effects inside of Photoshop to create Cinemagraphs. We also looked at a few different ways that you can export that content out to different file formats. So as I mentioned in the beginning, to me, a Cinemagraph is really an experience. Again, it has that speed of communicating as fast as a photograph with some cinematic motion and design in it. So on our website, codifydesign.com/cinemagraphs, we have a bunch of different Cinemagraphs that we've created. And we also use a couple of different file formats. We use MPEG-4, which is a video format, as many times or as often as we can. just because the file sizes tend to be really small and you can do a lot more with that format. Animated GIF, we tend to use a lot for email. And then, of course, you can get some of the same sort of effects using HTML with CSS, cascading style sheets, and with JavaScript, or the combination of all three. So we have some examples here, and on every one of these examples, there's a description in there that tells you a little bit about how we did it and the technologies that we're using to put that together. One of the advantages you get out of things like HTML and JavaScript is that you can randomize your animations. So in some of these cases, the animation will never loop or repeat. So that can be alluring in itself. As long as the animation plays, it's always going to be randomized. Animations can also be time-based or server-based. So maybe a photograph has a nighttime photo if the person is looking at it in the evening. There's just so many possibilities. But at the end of the day, all of these are really photographic based with some animations in there to just sort of grab their attention, but the animation is not necessary to tell the story of the project. And then finally, if you'd like to learn a little bit more about combining Photoshop with After Effects in order to create some cinemagraphs, I do have this course available on Creative Live. So you can take that course as well and dive into a little bit of After Effects along with Photoshop in order to create even more compelling cinemagraphs. And so with that, I appreciate you watching my session. Again, I hope you got a lot out of it. And I just would encourage you to try creating cinemagraphs, not only from your content, but content that you may get online or content from your clients. And so with that, I'll conclude this session, and thanks for joining me.